And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today. And my guest is the esteemed Jim Kouzes. And let me just give you a highlight of Jim's background because I'm really excited about today. He's the co-author with Barry Posner of the award-winning and best-selling book, The Leadership Challenge. Any of you that know the business book space, when I tell you that they sold 2.5 million copies, your jaws will probably drop because most of us are trying to sell 2,500 copies in this market. So that's a major accomplishment. The sixth edition of the Leadership Challenge was released in 2017 and is now available in 22 languages. Jim and Barry also developed the highly acclaimed leadership practices inventory known as LPI, which is sort of the standard 360 leadership assessment. And then I can go on and tell you about Jim's accolades and top 30 and been in the Wall Street Journal. But let's just dive in. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Peter, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's good to see you and be with you.
My pleasure. So you've been at this for quite some time, and you typically came at it as an extension of your academic career, right? So it is in some instances more of a logical linear path than many thought leaders take. But give me a sense, if you just sort of look back over the last couple of decades and say what's the same and what's changed when it comes to being a thought leader.
Well, Peter, I had a very serendipitous career, meaning a little bit of luck, some professional involvement with various associations, and then the continuous learning, which I love to do, probably why I'm in this field in the first place. And so I started out when I was in the Peace Corps, actually, in education. I was a teacher in the Peace Corps in 67 to 69 in Turkey. And I taught school, and I fell in love with education and decided I would switch from wanting to be an ambassador to teaching. Came back to the US and got a job teaching adults, not high school kids, like I had thought I would. And that led me into adult education, applied behavioral science. And then I directed a couple of university centers where I dealt with executives improving their skills and abilities after graduating with an MBA or bachelor's degree, and they're at work wanting to become better leaders. Hooked up with Barry Posner at Santa Clara University. He and I found we had some common interests, and that led to our exploring leadership together back in the early 80s. And first book came out in 87 and been at it ever since.
So stay on the collaboration with Barry for a while, because there are for most, not all, authorship, thought leadership is an individual sport, not a team sport, not a partnership. There have been examples, the Heath brothers and a couple of others, but not that have been at it so long together and continue to raise the bar collaboratively. I was listening to an interview the other day with Kahneman talking about his relationship with and what he said something to the effect of, every time I had an idea and shared it with him, he gave it back to me better. And I thought that was a really beautiful distillation of an amazing collaboration. So tell me a little bit about your collaboration with Barry.
I can recall very clearly the day we met. I was in Santa Clara University at the Executive Development Center unpacking my boxes, moving into the office. Invitation of the Dean of the Business School, Andre Delbeck, he invited me to join as a director of the Executive Development Center. And again, this knock on the door, and this guy said, "You're in my office." I said, oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I thought the dean told me this was my office. And he burst out laughing. And he said, yeah, well, it was my office. It's now your office. Welcome to Santa Clara University. Well, that was Barry Posner. That was an introduction to both his imposing height and also his humor, but more importantly, his interest in collaborating and working with others. And so Barry reached out, said, look, if you want to, get to know folks on the campus, you need some orientation, I'll walk you around, take you to the faculty club, welcome to Santa Clara, we're glad you're here. And oh, by the way, I do teach in the Executive Development Center. So if you'd like to continue that, let's have a chat. And I said, let's do it. And he, one, became a co-author. Two, he's been my best friend, and he and his wife and my wife we get together regularly for dinner, and we enjoy each other's company and bake brownies for each other. And, so it's been one of those relationships that's just been marvelous, both personally and professionally. But I think it came about because we found we had common interests,
Hmm.
and yet we weren't competing. I wasn't on the tenure track. I was in the executive development center, so I was an administrator, and he was on the tenure track. So we weren't competing for one spot on the faculty. He could do his thing, I could do mine. I had a very strong interest in the applied side. Barry has a strong interest to this day. He's now a chaired professor there and continues on at Santa Clara. I wanted to work on the applied side, where helping executives to put into practice what we learned from our research. And I say our in the broader sense of all of us
Hmm.
in the applied behavioral sciences, and specifically what Barry and I researched as well. And so there were complementary skills and interests. And I think that probably more than anything kept us working together, because I added value, he added value, but and we
So,
didn't really compete with each other
right.
professionally.
Right. So I mean, I think that lack of competition is if you're both going after that same one seat in a game of musical chairs, that's really hard to be, collaborative and friends, and it changes the energy. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the modalities, right? So over the years, obviously, being an academic, exec ed, you've done your fair share of keynote speaking. That world has changed a bit thanks to COVID, but you've really done an amazing job of codifying and institutionalizing the leadership challenge. So I find my experience, because I was a fan for a long time, is it's not based on charisma or woo woo. There is so much science underneath it, and then you get to the LPI piece. So tell me a little bit about how how you went about sort of getting the content so solid, and then moving it into the LPI, which it's everybody's it's how do you measure leadership, and how do you assess it and all that. And you said, well, step into step into my office, if you will.
Exactly. Well, I think you just articulated probably the two of the three pillars, the two that really have worked for us over time. People give us feedback that these are the reasons why they like our work. First of all, it's evidence based.
Hmm.
We don't say anything that we can't demonstrate. It's if you do this, you are much more likely, significantly more likely to be successful than if you don't do this. And we also provide real life experiences of real life managers and executives. This isn't a fable. This is not a story we made up. We talk to the real people doing it. And in each of our books, we have, in the neighborhood of 30 to 50 examples from working professionals in leadership roles of what they did when they were at their best. So it both provides rich example from
Well, let's be
practitioners.
there for a minute,
Mhm,
because one of the things I've found over the years is that, I mean, academics live in evidence. That's by definition,
mhm.
you know,
Yeah,
part of what they do. Very few, like you can probably count them, maybe a dozen, I don't know, are able to take that evidence and translate it in a way that is readable. Because, to become an academic, they beat it into you to produce academic papers, which,
yeah.
quite frankly, nobody wants to read, right? Like,
I
you don't
don't
even
want to
want to
read
read it
them.
by the time you're doing it, right? But so you look at some of the amazing folks that have come out of academia that have crossed the chasm, if you will, to not to make something readable and digestible and whatever, without having to go through an alpha Q sort or whatever. So how is that for you? Because that's not an easy bridge to cross.
Well, I think both Barry and I like working with executives and helping them apply what they learn from us.
Sure.
So Barry and I have a mindset of going from what we find in the research to be true. One finding being just part of our model that leaders, the foundation of leadership is personal credibility. Okay, that's great. So we want honest leaders. We want competent leaders.
Mhm.
What's that look like in practice? Does a constituent, a follower, know whether somebody is credible or not credible? So we
Mhm.
ask the next question. So what does that look like in practice? And to that question, for that particular finding, people told us, you do what you say you will do. Dwizzywyd, DWYSYWD, do what you say you will do. So we keep asking the questions, the next question. What does this look like in practice? How do you do that? Give us an example.
Those are I mean, those are questions are in English. Those are conversational questions that sound like a
yeah,
real conversation between two humans, which is not always what you get, right? So
yeah,
maybe that's the secret sauce. Is it just
that, yeah.
it's authentic?
We just we love learning from people who are practitioners out there doing it. Our research started by asking, tell us about a time when you were at your best as a leader. What did you do?
Hmm.
And then taking that information and seeing that there were patterns there that emerged from that. We called them the 5 practices of exemplary leaders. And our questionnaire, the leadership practice inventory, is behavioral. It asks people to look
Yeah.
at the behavior of someone and give them feedback. Are they doing this behavior, and how frequently are they doing it? So we love to do the research to make sure that there's the evidence there that supports these hypotheses, that
Hmm.
if you do this, then this will happen. But we also want to make sure that when people experience this or read it, they can use it. They can put it into practice.
And maybe
You
that's
know,
the recipe, the balancing act. Because I just finished reading your new book, and I love the evidence, but I would argue that if it wasn't filled chock full of real stories of real business people that highlighted what the data brought to life, I don't think it would. I don't think I would be able to internalize it as quickly, as easily, as make it as approachable, because numbers are numbers and data is data. But the one
yeah.
two punch of, and here's a story that shows that, leader X and company Y did this. Interesting. Interesting. If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. So, what are you seeing? What are some of the things over the years that you might have thought, like, yeah, I don't know if this will go anywhere, and then went somewhere sort of to a positive surprise?
Well, as any first author will tell you, you have aspirations for your book being adopted and being used in business and in
Sure.
potentially business school courses, but you never really know. And we were fortunate. And again, in asking people why they purchased our stuff, why they used our stuff, they said, well, because it's practical and because there's evidence behind it. So I think going in, we had this mindset of making it practical, usable, applied. And people gave us the feedback that that's what they wanted. So I think serendipitously, we presented the material initially with that in mind, making it
Hmm.
practical and applied. And then we had material that helped to support that. So somebody coming through a workshop or a seminar with us then had something they could take away and put into practice. And I think that is how we wrote, and that was, how we related the material, talked about it, spoke about it,
Sure.
developed others around it. So I
And it's
think
very,
it sustained itself for that reason.
I would say it's also very grounded. So one of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace now is pre-COVID, many speakers, and not to name names, there was a lot of sizzle and not a lot of steak, right? They had charm or charisma or energy, or they could be funny or wonderful accent or whatever, whatever, whatever. And that would carry the day for 60 minutes on stage at an event in Denver or Las Vegas or whatever. But it didn't really stick. 3 days later, somebody might remember a snide remark or a little data vignette or something like that. You guys never really went that route. Not that your work wasn't entertaining, but it wasn't designed to be entertainment. It was designed education first, delivered in a very pragmatic, practical way. So I would say that the world is coming back to that now from COVID, because we
Mm-hmm.
don't really have the time for the entertainment stuff. We're all, you want that, you can go to Netflix or go watch a TED talk or something like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
was that a conscious decision, or just sort of you guys being you?
I I think it's us being us. Barry, if you experience Barry, you'll find that he's very funny when he interacts, and so people are greatly entertained when he works with him. But you know that this guy is a solid academic, and he knows his stuff. And if you are with me, I'm a little bit more serious, and people know that my concern is for whether or not you can use this. And I think that has helped to sustain us. Hopefully, when I speak, I'm pretty out, outspoken and dynamic and energetic on the stage, and I need to be that way to keep the
Yeah,
audience
no, and
engaged.
I'm
But
not suggesting
it's
otherwise, but there's a difference between having stage presence
yes,
and
yes,
the gravitas underneath it that
yes,
is really the star. So I would argue, and
yeah,
it's meant as a compliment, that it's not that you're the star. The work is so amazingly wonderful. You're sort of just the messenger, which is kind of cool.
yeah, exactly. I think it's just one of those serendipitous happenings that when we teamed up, Barry was, again, more, well, what's the evidence here? And I was, yeah, we got the evidence, but so what? How do people put this in finding into practice? And those two conversations always got us, I think, to a better place. I was challenged if I made some assertion about, here's what these stories tell us about what executives do, and Barry would say, well, okay, but prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do some research to find it. And Barry would offer something from the academic literature, and I would say, well, great, but how do we use that? How would you use that as a manager in business? So we find that people are higher performers from the standpoint of their constituents. In other words, they were seen as more effective leaders when we call it encourage the heart, when they recognize and reward people. Yeah, well, that's great, but how do you do that on a day-to-day basis in business? And so
Well, I think that how you
that
do that piece is critical, because I can literally see the faces of many heads of HR or leaders where the CEO comes in with the proverbial book under their arm and says, oh, gee, I just read this over the weekend and we got to do this, right? Let's bring this guy in or this gal in and we've got to do this. And they start sweating because they've already got their 2-year plan. And I think if they were to sort of politely, they do this now and sort of say, wow, prove it. Okay, that book was great and it's entertaining and maybe people should read it, but it doesn't mean it represents a capability that we can develop in our people versus it's just a quirky person who's a great thinker and has an interesting perspective. And there's a difference between that and aha, because I could, manage and think differently after going through, LPI, right? I think
mm-hmm.
when you break that down, I'm like, oh, okay. So I've got to be trustworthy. Okay, I got it. I got to work on that. Like versus someone that's got the great stories. In any case, what do you see looking forward? What's I always hate to ask an author that just finished a book. What's what's next? But but what's next?
Well, right now, Peter, we're working on the 7th edition of Leadership Challenge. So that's our classic book. We first
Nice.
came out in '87. About every 5, max 6 years in between, we do a new edition. So 2017 was the last one.
Mm-hmm.
So 2022, 23 will be when we come out with the new edition. The pandemic has enabled us to look at things a little bit differently through a different lens. How does a global crisis impact leadership, and what's the data telling us about that? We're beginning to tease out some things that appear differently. For example, we have found that when we ask people, what do you look for and admire in a leader, someone whose direction you would willingly follow, which is one of our surveys, not the LPI, but a different survey. We look at characteristics or qualities people want. Credibility is still at the top. So honest and trustworthiness, competence, expertise at the top, but caring and supportive have significantly increased. And interestingly enough, it's desired even more by female respondents than male respondents.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if you just take that one, and if that trend holds, we're going to do another survey toward the fall to see if anything changes. But in this last year, that's one of the things we've noticed. So during times of crisis, difficulty, adversity, people want more supportive, caring leaders. That will then influence what we write in the next edition. So while the model is remaining the same, in that next edition, we'll be writing about some of these external influences that help us when times are tough and difficult, give us some guidance around that. So that's what we're focused on right now, and also focused on this most recent book, Everyday People, Extraordinary Leadership, where we're wanting to do more to develop leaders who aren't in formal positions, don't have titles as managers or executives. Those two things are where we're focused right now and thinking ahead the next 2-3 years.
Excellent. Well, that should keep you out of trouble for a while.
Yeah, at my age, it certainly will.
Well, I appreciate your time. I admired your work from afar for many years, and it was great to have an opportunity to chat with you today. Thank you so much, Jim.
Peter, you are most gracious. Thank you for the great work you are doing. You're really having an impact on folks out there. And I do appreciate what you're doing. And thanks for the opportunity to share our story with you.
Thank you. To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.